Hello and welcome to Homicide Hobbies. I'm Andy,
And I'm Claire.
and we're here to talk about some of the disturbing things that go on in the world, past and present. We feel like not knowing doesn't mean the crazy doesn't exist.
So we're going to scar you with the knowing.
Enjoy.
What you got for me today, Claire?
So today we're going to discuss the sumbitch Joe Tiny Metheny, who will go on a killing rampage in 1994/1995 in Baltimore, Maryland. In case you've heard of Joe, a lot of people have heard of him because they think he's the barbecue killer or blah, blah, blah. But we'll get into why.
Because he ate a lot of barbecue? Why is he a barbecue killer?
Well, he is fat, but he'll claim that he barbecued people. Anyway, Let's get into it. So Joe was born March 2nd, 1953. Now, in his early life, Joe would claim he lived in foster care after his dad died when he was just 6, but in reality, his mother was working double shifts, working as a waitress, a barmaid, and even on a food truck, driving it around and also manning that food truck to take care of her 6 children after the death of her alcoholic husband, or Joe's alcoholic father, dies in a car accident.
Shit.
Right? It seems to me that he probably
needs to get
stayed
smacked.
He does need to get smacked because it seemed more likely that he was probably staying at maybe a friend's house or a relative's house overnight because his mother was at work. He wasn't in foster care, jackass. Anyway, so that way his mother could go to work and provide for her children. Now, Joe and his attorneys would say his mother neglected him and his siblings. Joe would even go on to say that his mother died, which came as a surprise to her.
Wow.
Now, his tales would continue of stories of his abuse as a child, which is not substantiated in any way. So other than, you're going to go into this, Joe is a fucking pathological liar. Now, His mother would say they were poor, but she had provided her children with a normal family, and they'd never gone hungry. They were never placed in foster care or lived with other families like Joe claimed. But she would describe Joe as an above-average student. He was polite. He was never mean. He enjoyed riding his bike. He didn't get into fights with other kids. He was a good, normal boy. So
that's a really good mom. Finding out that your kid talked mad as an adult, I'm assuming, shit about you, and then you still list their positive qualities.
Well, especially when he's like, my mom's dead. I sure fucking am not. I'm right here, you son of a bitch. Worked real hard to give you the things, you little asshole.
I done washed your PP sheets until you were a teenager. Did he wet his bed till you? Uh-huh.
I don't know. I wasn't checking his britches.
I wasn't sure if he was one of them serial killers.
Now, this one made me laugh because Joe's mom would go on to say, if he was neglected, it was his own fault. It was a pretty good home. I don't know how that is. Like, if you were neglected, it was your fault. What?
No, I agree with that because you know what? If she was it sounds like she's working her ass off to provide for her kids. She didn't just go shack up with another man that ended up abusing him or anything. No, she put her kids first, worked her butt off to provide for them. So if he was neglected in any way, it's because he probably didn't speak up and say that he needed something. And it sounds like their needs were met. So he's just a little brat that maybe he wanted something that somebody else had, you know? So he felt because he didn't have that, he went without. Spoiled brat.
But she would say, it was hard on me. I had to work to support the family, and I did everything I could to keep my kids together. We weren't rich, but we always had something to eat and a roof over our heads. And I never went on welfare.
Good for her.
So it's just like, So that'll bring us to 1971. Joe would make the decision to join the Army at 18.
Now he's going to go without.
All of your people are military dudes. But I didn't even expect him to go into the military. Never heard that one. But his mother would recall he served a tour in Germany, but Joe would claim he served a tour in Vietnam in 1973, and that's where he became addicted to heroin while in an artillery unit there. I'm getting to it, I know. Now, during his service, he would get drunk and smash a bottle over a woman's head that would result in him being court-martialed. Now,
he sure is a great feller.
Sure is. Now, in regards to Joe serving in Vietnam, the U.S. troops left Vietnam in March of 73, so there is no, there's no history of Joe going to Vietnam. And not only that, when he went into the military, the U.S. troops were already pulled out. So the likelihood of that story being true is not.
Maybe he was just really confused as to where his location was.
I think if that's where he started doing heroin was in Germany, more likely, that he was so doped up, he didn't know what country he was in. And then he's so drunk that he's smashing bottles over people's heads. Naturally, it's not going to be surprising he finds his way out of military life between the heroin and the alcohol. But as we've seen plenty of times...
of people.
Right. But as we've seen in plenty of times, once people go down the path of drugs and alcohol, they kind of distance themselves from family. So when he gets back and is exiting the military life, he becomes distant from his family, rarely contacting them, and eventually stopping altogether. Fast forward to the 1990s, Joe is ironically named Tiny. It's ironic because he's 6'1" and over 450 pounds.
Holy shit. He's a big boy.
Yeah. Now, I thought it was funny because later Joe's quoted that, and it's not all fat. And I'm like, no, I've seen pictures of this feller. He's fat. He's fat. It's clearly not all fat because you have to have bones and muscle in there somewhere, but he's not a muscular man.
I was going to say, he's got bones and muscle. He's got eyelashes. Those count.
Yeah. But no, the whole, not to get wrong with anything, but 450 pounds moving is still 450 pounds, so I wouldn't want to get mowed over by a 6'1", 450 pound man.
Yeah, he's a big feller.
The silver lining would be, since he's got cushion, it would shock absorbers. Now, sometime around the first 2 weeks of July 1994, while working as a $7 per hour forklift driver, Joe would lure Kathy Ann Magaziner, who was 39 years old, to his trailer. Now, that trailer was located at the pallet company where he worked. Now, the pallet company was located adjacent to a wooded lot. The entrance was locked at the front gate. The fence was 8 foot tall that surrounded the whole property with barbed wire on top. The lot is roughly 1 city block and has a warehouse on it that's surrounded by thousands of pallets because it's a pallet company. They're stacked at varying heights. There's no one on the property at nights, and the property is at the end of a dead-end street with no pedestrian traffic. And then the nearest residence was over 2 blocks away. So it's at the end, it's quiet, there's not a whole lot of people.
Yeah, it's super secluded. Even if there are people, they can't get there because of that barbed wire.
Yep. Now, while in this trailer, Kathy Ann and him would have sex after about an hour of hanging out together. Now, Joe would then strangle Kathy Ann to death with an extension cord, rob her of her purse and clothing, and then proceed to bury her body in a shallow hole on the property. Now, her belongings he buried in a separate hole, and then buried her naked body just somewhere else. 2 different holes is the goal there. Her body would be undiscovered for 2 years. Now, Joe would claim that he later dug up her body roughly 6 months after he killed her and removed her head and then threw that in the trash. Now, when her body is finally... I don't fucking know. When her body is finally recovered, it is missing its head.
Oh,
now,
I bet he fucked her skull.
He probably did. But the only reason I think that actually did happen is because when her head's missing, I don't know if you've ever seen well, not in person at all. You don't know when you see a skeleton, how the top part of your jaw is attached to your head, but the bottom jaw it detaches because there's no muscle anymore holding it together.
Mm-hmm.
That when they find the body, the lower mandible is still with the body, and that's what identifies the body later. Because they do dental records, they don't find the top half of her head. But so I would think if he decapitated her when she was fresh, that it would have been at the neck, not half her mouth.
At the jaw, yeah.
Right. So that's where I do believe he redug her up and took the top of her head.
Ew.
So that's when he kills the first person. Now, by 1995, his son is now 6 years old. Joe will come home after working late one night. He was working overtime as a truck driver. Now, when he gets home, he opens the door, clicks the light on, and finds his wife, fiance, girlfriend, old lady, whatever you want to call her, has emptied the house and left with his son. Now, for me, I was like, dude, you just fucked some chick in your work trailer, and you don't come home. You're just hanging out at bars, sleeping wherever. You may or may not come home. Yeah, don't be surprised if you're not there when he gets back.
Yeah.
Anyway, so he would say he wasn't upset that she left, but he was upset that she took his son. And I was like, okay, so you wanted her to leave a 6-year-old loose in the house?
Right. That's where my brain just went of, so you'd be less angry if you came home and there was a 6-year-old that's been completely neglected.
But the next few months, he would spend his time trying to hunt her down all over Baltimore before he tracked her to a crack house. There, he learned that his wife had been kicked out of that particular crack house and was living with a group of homeless people under a bridge on the other side of the city.
So I had a little bit of respect for her packing her shit and leaving until you just got to that point of...
No. So he
finds
out that she's shacking up with a feller who apparently got her. I would imagine she had a drug issue prior to Joe, but the new boyfriend she shacks up with gets her on crack, which is why he was able to trace her to a crack house, but then gets her prostituting herself. So she gets arrested for prostitution a few months after she left Joe, but her son was there, so he was made
while
a
she was
ward.
Prostituting?
I would assume, because when she's arrested for prostitution, the son is made a ward of the state. So for me, he was fucking there, and I feel like there was also cocaine present because all of that situation was pretty bad. But naturally, when Joe finds this information out, he's enraged and determined to seek revenge. So Joe would drive over to the bridge where he expected to find his wife, fiance, whatever, and her new boyfriend. He was armed with an axe. He parked his car. He parked his car, got out, didn't find his wife or lover. Instead, he found 2 homeless men that were passed out on a dirty mattress, Randall Brewer and Randy Piker. He had met these 2 men before when he was homeless and had had words with them before, but chock full of rage, he began swinging, hacking both men to death where they laid. He then covered their bodies with a blanket, tossed tree limbs and trash all over them to cover the bodies. Now, apparently during this time, there were rival groups of homeless people, and
I didn't know that was a thing.
I didn't either, but apparently they have turf wars and such, and it kind of makes sense if you think of it as like, if you're gonna fight over the best spot to be, like as it gets cold or anything, the best location, resources, all those things, squabbling over, because it kind of goes back to the basics. So I can understand where there'd be turf wars if you have people who don't get along, or maybe you got homeless people who are just wacko and, you know,
go around whacking people with axes.
Yes, there's that too. But so apparently these homeless groups will have all sorts of like weapons with them because they're like battling. But I was like, sorry, this is like the homeless version of the Vikings.
Yeah. I guess they're protecting
what they have.
Their possessions too.
Right. Because it's like just a lawlessness of tent cities. Really anyway, so there's these rival groups going on, and another homeless man, Larry Amos, was accused of stealing the murder weapon and using it to kill Everett Dowell, yet another homeless man. Now, all three bodies are going to be discovered August 2nd, 1995. Now, Joe would keep returning to that spot, but found a drugged up prostitute and asked her about his wife's whereabouts because naturally prostitutes stick together, so he's going to interrogate this lady. He apparently brings crack to coax out information, but no matter how high he gets her, she doesn't tell him anything. So he gets mad and decides to hack her up.
I know this sounds stupid, but I would have assumed that there'd be more fighting among the prostitutes than the homeless people.
I don't know. I feel like they have enough of a problem with the people paying them for sex fighting them than other prostitutes, but I guess there could be turf wars there too. Now, Joe would keep going back to the spot in hopes of finding his wife and her lover, but each time they weren't there, and he would just kill who was. He would claim he killed 3 men and 4 women. He also would claim he killed a couple of anglers who he thought might have seen him kill the homeless men. He would say he weighed down the bodies and sunk them in a stream. But years after being caught, the police would go searching for bodies and not find anything. So other than those 3 homeless men, and one of them he didn't kill, those are the only bodies they find. And since he doesn't know their names, like, who knows if he actually did it or if he was just high.
I mean, that's entirely possible. But one of the fellers didn't die?
What?
You said he attacked the 3, but one of them didn't die?
No. So the 3 homeless people, he killed the 2 fellers on the mattress, and then another homeless man stole the axe. I guess he left it. So another homeless man picked up the axe and used it to kill a 3rd person. So, and that night, 3 homeless men were found. Joe only would claim to kill the 2, and then the other feller killed the 1. But it was all done with the same axe, so it's one of those, you will get there, because I promise I'm getting there, but I'm just saying, he would claim he kept going back and killed a total of 3 men and 4 women, and sunk them in the stream. Now, I think, because he makes these claims from a jail cell, that he's got some teeny wiener issues in jail and is trying to make the best of his situation and make him seem real big and bad and this hardened criminal.
Yeah, I believe that.
He's just another one to embellish that criminal behavior. And why would his small brain teeny weeny be any different? But Joe would be arrested for the murders of the 2 homeless men. Well, actually all 3. But there wasn't enough evidence, and he was acquitted at the end of his July 1996 trial. He would spend roughly a year in jail waiting for that trial, and then when the trial started. It was too easy for the jury to believe that the other homeless man killed all 3, because Larry Amos, the other homeless man, would plead guilty to manslaughter for killing Everett Dowell, and he would end up serving 1 year and 9 months of his 8-year sentence, because it was like aggravated. I know. 1 year? He killed a man with a fucking axe. This is 96, Andrea.
Oh, shit.
But I was like, Jesus Christ. But,
was there like a claim of self-defense dabbled in there?
I figure, because again, that's why with all the homeless rivalries going on, apparently the homeless men turn up dead a lot. But it is also Baltimore.
Oh.
But so during Joe's trial, it was too easy for the jury to believe that the other feller just killed all 3. Now, after Joe gets out and he's acquitted, he goes back to Joseph Stein and Son Pallet Company where he was working prior to that arrest and pleads for his job back. Now, he negotiates, naturally when he gets out of jail, he doesn't have anything, he doesn't have a house, he doesn't have anywhere, not that that's abnormal for him to be homeless, but he negotiates with his previous employer that he'll also agree to live on the premises in the trailer and be the night watchman, which they agree to. Which I was like, all right. Unknowingly to them, he now is sleeping right next to the body he buried, Kathy Ann.
I wonder if that's when he went back and dug up her skull.
No, because he was in jail a year. Although it would make sense because Now, I haven't murdered anybody to know how long you can leave them in the dirt and then dig them up and how decomposed they are to pull off the top of their head, but I guess if he did that after jail, it would make more sense.
Yeah, it'd be easier to come apart.
But he claimed 6 months, so I would think they were still together. But
Well,
I guess it's
we
also
done learned
when it's warm.
he don't know where he's at geography wise,
Right.
and it's possible he ain't so good with the calendar in.
Probably. Now,
Maybe
by
he meant 6 months after he got out of jail.
No,
and he's just
because
not
he'll
good
find
with the
himself right
wordings
back
neither.
in. He'll find himself right back in jail before 6 months. But so he gets out in July, right? Now, by mid-November, Joe meets Kimberly Spicer at the Borderline Bar in Arbutus, Maryland. Now, Kimberly was lured back to Joe's trailer where she was raped, stabbed, and strangled. Now, he didn't have time to bury her body, so he stashes her just outside the factory.
What do you mean, just stashes her?
He throws her body and then covers it with garbage.
Wow.
Garbage and twigs. Now, he would end up building a wall of pallets around his trailer, roughly 10 feet high, so that way he has his privacy for all of his nightly activities. So
For all his rape-ins?
Yep. Now, December 10th, 1996, so same year, just nearly a month later, Joe would be sharing some Southern Comfort and lines of cocaine with his pal and co-worker, William Clint Ashbrook, known as Clint. Now, they're doing this at his trailer on the property when their conversation takes a dark turn. Joe would ask Clint if he would help him move a body.
What?
Naturally, Clint naturally thought Joe was just joking, even if it was a bad joke. But Joe would lead him over to a pile of trash, trees, tires, to reveal a naked, decaying body of a young woman. Joe would
How
claim...
did they not smell it?
I think because all the trash and everything else. But I did the same thing of like, it's also December, so maybe because it's cold. Tell Clint that the woman had owed him $300, so he stabbed her to death. Clint would say that he
Over
just stood...
$300?
He only makes $7 an hour.
Somebody's life should be worth more than $300.
I don't think she owed him shit.
Probably $300 worth of sex. Was she a prostitute?
So all the people he would claim were prostitutes. Some of them had drug-related issues. I don't want to say she was a prostitute, but I feel like he was able to lure people to his trailer with the promise of drugs. And I feel like once they were drugged up, that's when he would try to play hide the pickle. But I feel like $300 to have sex with him is still low. I don't even know how he found his penis. That's probably why there was a struggle. But anyway...
He's real mad. She was laughing. He's trying to dig for it.
Now, Clint would say that he just stood there unable to look at the woman and also afraid, while Joe wrapped the body in a red tarp and hid her back behind the dumpster. Now, Clint would tell him that he would help some other time and then rush off on his motorcycle.
What?
But then... I know. But hold up. But then he returns less than an hour later with more cocaine. Now, when he returns, Joe is out of breath, sweaty, and in a panic. I partially laughed because I feel like Joe is always sweaty. He's 450 pounds.
Was he doing some necrophilia and getting it on with that body?
No. So he was panicked that Clint had gone to the police, so he moved the body himself so that Clint didn't know where it was. Now, the two men...
He would have had to move it really far, because if the police showed up to search the area, they still would have found it. Just because it wasn't behind the dumpster anymore doesn't mean they wouldn't have found it.
Dude, that's why when he was described as intelligent, I just scratched my head and was like, compared to what?
Well, kind of like we were talking about with another sick person we might know, of they can be book smart, but that don't mean that they got the street smarts.
I don't think he's either. But the two men would continue drinking beer and snorting cocaine until they passed out into the night. The next day, Clint would say that Joe acted like nothing had happened the night before. Now, Clint would go to his bosses at the pallet company, both Joe Stein Sr. and Joe Stein Jr., about the
You
body.
like the Joes.
This is a 3 Joe story. Now, both men had criminal history together as father and son. Now, Joe Sr. would go to jail a handful of times for armed robbery and theft-related charges. Don't get lost in this, because I'm going to give you a background of these two fellers to paint you a picture of why I think they were okay with the little teeny-weeny Joe coming back to work after being acquitted of murder, and also why I don't think they were fazed by anything he was doing, because these are not honest people.
All right.
Now, so I'm going to give you a little bit of background on where Joe is working and where there are now 2 bodies on the property.
Are we going to label these Joes so we know who we're talking about?
Sure am. We got Joe Jr. and Joe Sr., and then we got just regular old Tiny Pecker Joe. But Tiny Pecker Joe, the murderer...
Hey, maybe that's why his name was Tiny.
I think so. But I also feel like when you get to be 450 pounds, it probably looks small, because if you were regularly sized, it would have been normal. But if you make everything else swell up, it's not growing. As far as I know, it doesn't extend because your waistline did.
Oh my God.
Anyway, gonna give you a little bit of background on the people that Clint just told, hey, just so you know, there's a body here. You might want to be aware of it, and why, and how, and why they reacted the way that they do. So, they both have a handful of armed robbery and theft-related charges, right? Now, one sentence in particular in 1970 for Joe Sr., he'd find himself in jail on an armed robbery charge, for which he was looking at serving 12 years, right? Now, Joe Sr. believed robbery was the best path to getting what he wanted.
All right.
Now, Joe Jr.'s mom would die from being an alcoholic at a tender age of 33. She would leave him very young, and then Joe Sr. would start teaching Joe Jr. ways of breaking into things. Since he was small, he would use him to break into the pharmacies and unlock and disable the alarms and all that, so they could rob pills, and he was heavy eating the barbiturates like they were candy. So That's how Joe Jr.'s raised, so they start doing all that togethering. Now, Joe Jr. would marry Joe Jr., or Joe Sr. would marry Joe Jr.'s aunt, or if it makes it easier for your brain hole, his late sister. Yeah, his late wife's sister, if you ain't good at the family treeing. Now,
I'm good at the family treeing, but I guess theirs is getting intertwined.
Sure is. Now, her brother would get the idea, because Joe Sr.'s in jail for all his robberies. Her brother would get the idea to rob a liquor store in order to raise the money for Joe Sr.'s defense, which they did. And by they, I mean Joe Jr. and his uncle. Which I was like, what the fuck? Let's go rob a liquor store to raise money for legal defense for a feller who's on a burglary charge that he did. Anyway, Joe
Makes
Jr.
a whole lot of sense.
Joe Jr. would visit his dad in jail, who he would order Joe Jr. to go murder the witness in his case so that the charges would go away, which also did the whole, that's not how that works. Joe Jr. tracked the lady down and waited at her home with a shotgun. When she got home, he couldn't do it, so he would go back to jail and tell his dad he couldn't find her. Joe Jr. is barely 17.
Oh my gosh.
That's what I'm saying. That just to paint you a picture of who owns this business, of what the fuck. Now, shortly after that whole scenario, the feller that robbed the liquor store with Joe Jr. would be arrested and roll on Joe Jr. as his accomplice. So Joe would be tried as an adult and end up sentenced to 12 years. He wouldn't do all 12 and would be released after 5. Now, his dad would get out of prison a bit before him, and they would celebrate their reunion with a burglary. I was like, all right. Now, the two would have a falling out because Joe Jr. gets married and starts cranking out kids, and naturally, when you start having children, your priorities change, or they should. So then
Yeah, I was about to say they should. His Paul, it was sure different.
he grows a conscience and realizes that he wants to be a better person for his children. So they go their separate ways because Joe wants to turn a new chapter and be a good, honest, hardworking feller for his family. Now, Joe Sr. will re enter Joe Jr.'s life in the 90s. He claims to have also had a transformation thanks to his newfound religious practices. So much so that he was now a proud business owner of Joe Stein and Son. I thought it was funny because he named it Joe Stein and Son. His son doesn't work there yet. So he was assuming his son would want to participate in the family business.
I don't feel like it's that far-fetched.
Well, so Joe Jr. was struggling because they were cranking out kids. And so when his dad says, I'd be more than proud to have you work here. And Joe Jr. is okay starting from the bottom. He does all sorts of jobs. He makes himself useful. He thinks that, he's always dreamed of a good family. So he's thrilled to have his dad back in his life, working towards an honest living. But it doesn't take long before Joe Jr. realizes everything wasn't above board like he thought. Joe Jr. starts seeing envelopes of cash exchanging hands, merchandise that had nothing to do with pallets, including TVs, fridges, paper products, food, all appearing on the loading docks and then disappearing. So it didn't take him long to put together what his dad was up to. He was stealing again, but on a scale way greater than they had done before. Now, he claims to grapple with whether to turn a blind eye or not, but he knew he would not be participating in that. So for a little while, he just doesn't do anything, and then that turmoil makes him realize that he doesn't just want to not participate, he wants to do what's right. So he would go to the FBI and agree to be an informant.
Oh, shit.
Now, a federal lawsuit would later be brought against the company by Solo Cup. According to the lawsuit, Joe Sr. bribed the manager of Solo's Baltimore warehouse and to the shipping and receiving clerk. Now, one would get $128, the other would get $500 for each time that they did a signature of false receipts for pallets that were not delivered, shorting them by hundreds of pallets, and those pallets would be delivered to Stein and Son instead. So it's just like, and it wasn't just Solo Cup that they were ripping off. Other companies were on that list too. GE, Sweetheart Cup, Knoxville, Beverage Capital Corp. They're also being robbed blind too. In addition to that sideshow, they were also drug dealing out of the warehouse and trafficking guns. So Joe Sr. was in some pretty serious shit. Yeah. He would also hire people to assault those he thought double-crossed him. Now, sometimes that muscle was Joe, not Joe Jr., but Joe Metheny, our teeny peeny. Now, I think that is why they were okay with him coming back after his acquittal, because can you imagine having the bragging rights or the threat that you have a feller working for you that got away with murder? Whether it happened or not to them, they get to be like, that feller.
Well, just his size would be intimidating.
Yeah. Well, that too. But, so that's where I was just like, nah, I get why they needed somebody on the property overnight. Because they're doing all sorts of things that they shouldn't be doing, and that's where the pieces connect to me, why they had no problem with Joe coming back, and they also had no problem with Joe sleeping there overnight. Frankly, they liked that they had their guard dog there.
Yeah, what's a few dead ladies?
Now, this would put them on the FBI's radar because of all this, right? Which, to me, is ironic that Joe Metheny would find this place to work. I think it's crazy how criminals can find each other, but especially the fact that the FBI would be kind of keeping an eye. Like, this is in the throes of their investigating when Joe is killing people.
I guess
So I
it's safe
just,
to say they weren't doing a stakeout.
well, so that's why I wanted to tell you how big the lot was. A whole city block. Even if they were parked outside the gate, if the trailer's on the back and it's surrounded by woods, they really can't see or hear anything that's happening back there.
True. Unless there's a way to park on the other side of the fence. Then all you can do is hear. But I feel like those ladies didn't go down without a fight. So, well, if they
Well,
were
it's
high.
also, yeah, it's also if they were on drugs and didn't make a peep. Fortunately, they're not alive to tell. But long story short on that snippet, Joe Jr. would eventually testify against his dad in an effort to get out of the trouble he was in by being part of the scene because it happened practically all of the 90s. Now, no good deed goes unpunished there because having the criminal history he had and the only real job reference being the man he was putting in jail, he would find it real hard to find a job and make ends meet and provide for his family. So he would end up making $100 a day transporting cars, if he had a job transporting cars. But he would end up having his car repossessed, filing bankruptcy. It was just basically a whole thing. Now, that part of that was because when the FBI offered to put them in witness protection, Joe Jr.'s wife didn't want to break contact with her family. So they didn't, I mean, they ended up relocating, but they couldn't just restart. So they did it on their own, which was super hard.
I get not wanting to separate from your family, but they have kids. Wouldn't
Yeah.
you want to keep your kids safe?
I guess if they figured Joe Sr. was in jail, they were safe. But Joe Jr. hoped that one of the companies that had been being screwed those past few years would offer him a meaningful job, but that doesn't happen.
Oh, gee, shock.
Now, that FBI investigation started a little more than a year before Joe started doing the murdering. Now, I think, again, that it was crazy the FBI was right there. Now, another little tidbit is really going to make your head spin of this incestuous pool we have going.
Oh,
Joe
gosh.
Jr.'s wife is Clint's sister, the one who tells, or that Joe, Teeny Weeny Joe, tells about the body or shows the body to.
Ugh. Wait,
Right? This is very interconnected. Joe Jr.
wait.
and Joe
Is
Sr.
this
own
a
the pallet
second?
company.
Wait, is this a second wife or is this the wife that took the little boy?
Joe Jr.'s wife.
Oh. Oh.
So Joe Jr. and Joe Sr. are the pallet company
The owners. Yeah.
owners. Joe Jr.'s wife is the sister of Clint, who is Joe the murderer, who just whipped up the pile of twigs and trash to show the body to Clint.
They
So it's
sound
just
like a
like,
wannabe mob. You know how it's like all keep it in the family?
I feel like it was because the fact that Clint was an in-law to
Yeah.
them, and he was also partaking in the fake deliveries and all that because he also will be arrested, and when all the pallet company nonsense goes down, he'll be charged with the shit too because he knew about it. He was participating. He was one who carried the cash. So, but he would also participate in testifying in court. So anyway, back to the murdering. I just wanted you to understand that scenario. So when Clint goes to his bosses and it's just like, yeah, there's a body on here, that they're like, yeah, they can't just go to the police right away because
Let's
they got
face it.
stolen shit.
Let's face it. It's not him going to a boss. It's him going to his in-laws.
Yeah. Well, regardless, he would go to Joe and Joe or Joe Jr. and Joe Sr. to report what he saw, and I feel like Joe Sr. at least, did the whole, well, fuck, I can't just have the police come on the property. Now,
I wonder if it was that or if it was more, Big Joe or, well, Tiny Joe, Teeny Weeny Joe was like, I'll keep my nose out of your business. You keep your nose out of mine. And I'll keep an eye on this here property.
well, so the murdering Joe doesn't know Joe Sr. and Joe Jr. were told. So Clint would wait a whole day before kind of pushing it with the owners, Joe Jr. And Joe Jr. would take Clint to talk to his FBI contact, and the FBI contact would get Clint to agree to wear a wire in hopes of getting Joe to talk about the body again or what he had done. So Clint goes back to Joe to try to coax him to talk about it. Now Joe would just reply, "Your best bet is to forget anything you saw." Now, with the wire on, the FBI would become aware of Joe Sr. using arson against his enemies, which would later be used against him, obviously. But Joe Jr. would find the tarp under the trailer, and Clint would identify the body as the one he had seen that night.
So Joe didn't hide it very far.
It's under the trailer that he lives in, so no.
Ew.
Now,
talk about smelly.
Right. Now, on December 14th, Rita Kemper was lured back to Joe's trailer with the promise of cash for sex with him and a night of getting high. Now, Rita was barely through the trailer door when Joe grabbed her throat and started throttling her. He lost his grip, and Rita was able to wriggle free, bolting from the trailer. He managed to grab hold of her, like as she's going. I imagine him like grabbing an ankle or something, but he manages to grab her, drag her back into the trailer, yank her pants down, and attempts to rape her. All the while,
he couldn't find his penis.
I imagine it was a struggle. All the while, he's saying, "I'm going to kill you and bury you in the woods with the other girls."
Oh, nice.
Now, I guess while Joe was busy trying to locate his penis, Rita manages to squirm free again, bolt out of the trailer, and quite literally begin running for her life. Fortunately, Joe was obese and couldn't come close to catching her as he hobbled out of his trailer in an attempt to prevent her escape. She scaled over the pallet wall he had built. To Joe's astonishment, he would say she scaled the pallets like a damned monkey. Which I was like, yeah, go! I picture him like heavy breathing, just standing in the threshold of the door, watching her like just one like bound over the shit. But
she managed. Lucky he didn't have a gun.
Well, yeah. Now Rita then hopped the fence. Mind you, it's got barbed wire at the top. And she runs down the main road until she finds a guy in a pickup truck to call the police for her.
What it is he lifted his folds and she smelled the decaying flesh under that fold and she's like, "I'm out."
No, I figured he was already so sweaty from the struggle. That's where he found it hard to get a good grip.
The struggle to find his penis?
Well, the struggle to find his penis, but also when she got out the door, that him trying to grab hold of her, that he was doing more moving than he thought. But I think that's crazy because keep in mind he's 6'1" and 450 pounds. He blocks an entire hallway of a trailer that, like, I would imagine it's probably beneficial that he attacked her close enough towards the door that she was able to wiggle free again. And I say wiggle because 450 pounds on you, that's why people were strangled. It wasn't with his hands. He just lifted his belly.
You like the smotherings with the
450 pounds laying on you?
No.
That's a lot. I can't even imagine these poor women. But fortunately, Rita's able to scramble out of there. Now, when police arrive at the trailer, it's 1:40 in the morning, and Joe's just sitting by the entrance waiting for them, and he does surrender without a fight. Now, he said that after Rita got loose, he knew the police were going to be coming for him. So he gathered up Rita's clothes, even goes to unlock the front gate, which is where he was when the police officer arrived, pulled his gun on him, and told him to get on the ground. And
God, again, that seems like a tough task.
Right? Give him a minute. Bear in mind, this is a 450 to 500 pound man with face tattoos of teardrops and a cross between his eyes. Which I personally think is stupid, but whatever.
You never said that he had tattoos all over his face.
I done just did. I painted that pretty picture for you.
It's not pretty. It looks like if it was a scratch and sniff, I'd run for the hills.
I wouldn't sniff. Now, when he gets to the station, the police inform him that Rita had told them he said he planned to kill her like he had all the rest, which he admits was true. Now, by 3 p.m., the real interrogation would begin, and he would admit to murdering Kathy Ann Magaziner, the lady he dug up and took her head, and even drew a diagram of where he buried her. The police went out but didn't find her, so they bring Joe out and he points to an area roughly 10 feet from where they were digging. He then continues to confess to 10 murders. There's no evidence to support the other cases. Again, they go out, they search the creek where he claims he sunk bodies. They don't find anything. But again, I feel like since he's such a fucking liar...
creek was shallow.
So that's why it's just like, I feel like he's just a fucking liar. All the time. He just makes shit up.
I don't understand how you sink a body into a stream or a creek. I always thought a stream and a creek were like small and shallow.
I don't know, because we've done a few cases where people are drowned in them. I mean, they end up finding them, but you can have different depths, like where it gets deep-ish. But I find it hard to believe that nobody finds them. But I also find it hard to believe anything Joe says.
Yeah.
He would also admit to killing the 2 homeless men that he had been acquitted of killing earlier that year. A third would be linked to Joe that occurred also in 1994 near Interstate 95, 28-year-old Tony Ingracia. Her body would be found not far from where Joe was working, and just like the other 2 victims, she was stabbed and strangled. He was charged for her murder, but it was later dropped due to insufficient evidence. Which I think is bullshit if they're going to admit to it. But
yeah, that doesn't make sense.
Like, from my understanding, if they can retract a confession and you don't have anything else, then there's no legs for it. So
right.
They were just sticking to the ones where they could stick to him. Now, he would receive a 50-year sentence for the kidnapping and assault on Rita. They had sought an attempted murder charge, but the jury found him not guilty of that charge because they didn't think that he was trying to murder Rita, which I was like, what?
What?
Now, when he gets that 50-year sentence for kidnapping and assault, his attorney would say, I think 50 years is pretty severe, but I guess I'm not surprised in light of what he's accused of.
His attorney's a moron.
Yeah. They dug deep for that person. Now, at his trial for Kimberly Spicer, the body that he didn't bury, he would beg the jury to put him to death, and they would agree that he needed to be wiped from this world. Now, his attorney would say that drugs and alcohol changed his personality and made him a violent man. Now, Joe Sr., during this time, would be charged with being an accessory after the fact because he helped Joe get rid of Kimberly Spicer's clothing and helped clean the trailer of the evidence of the murder.
What?
That's why I wanted to tell you about his background and all that. And I think rather than have the police come in, I think he was too worried about what he had already had going for him that he was willing to help somebody cover up a murder to keep his shit going.
Wow.
Right. And that was Joe Sr. Now, he would also be charged with felony arson because, like I said, with all those wires in that place now, they had information about him setting fire to 2 trucks that belonged to a man that Joe Sr. believed had double-crossed him. He gets 10 years in a federal prison. Now, Joe Jr. would say his dad thought there was an informant in their midst and promised to have that person killed if they found out who it was. Now, Joe Jr. and the FBI believed that he would do that, which is why they had offered Joe Jr. the witness protection, which I think is crazy. They did not take that up.
His wife's an idiot. Do they get killed? Do you know? I know it has nothing really to do.
I don't believe so. I feel like other than disowning him and they never get back together, I did not continue searching that because this isn't about those 2.
Right. I was just curious.
I would imagine if they died, it would have been an article that popped up. Now, Joe, Teeny Weeny Joe, his last words during his sentencing to the jury were, the words, I'm sorry, will never come out, for they would be a lie. I am more than willing to give up my life for what I have done, to have God judge me and send me to hell for eternity. Now, Joe's reason for murdering was he liked the high or rush from taking a life. Now, unfortunately, his sentence would be commuted to life in prison without parole, plus 50 years for kidnapping Rita Kemper. So at least he wouldn't ever get out of jail.
Well, did he lose a massive amount of weight in jail? Because I'm curious if he's got
Sure.
like a metabolism issue or like a thyroid issue. Because with as much as he's moving around, you'd think he'd be dropping pounds real quick.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know what his diet consisted of. Now, later,
Well, once
Joe
he's
would...
in jail, it should be cut
Now,
them calories real quick.
Now, later on is when Joe would claim that he butchered women and barbecued their flesh and sold them as beef and pork at an open pit beef stand he ran on the side. The human body tastes very similar to pork. If you mix it together, no one can tell the difference. Now, this was never validated, so it could be more hot air from his stupid ass. He would also claim after his trial that he would dig up his victims to have sex with their bodies. He would also claim he lured two crack whores to his trailer where he killed them and butchered them, storing their flesh in Tupperware in his freezer. All of this bullshit comes out 8 years after his arrest and trial. So I think he's just attention seeking, and as much as people like the idea of the sick and twistedness, I think he's just making shit up in his brain hole. He would then say he would barbecue on the weekends and sell his little flesh sandwiches. Now, Joe's biggest regret, it's not the murderings. It's he wish he was able to kill the two people he really wanted to. His ex-old lady and the bastard she hooked up with. I can't tell you.
He got distracted from that mission.
He sure did. It was all the crack and heroin. It detracted from his main goal.
And the digging out of his Pepe.
It was hard to find. Now, he would die August 5th, 2017, in his prison cell. He would be found unresponsive. Probably so.
I feel like that's a lot of weight on his heart.
Yeah. And he would be found by prison guards around like 3 in the afternoon. But considering how unhealthy he lived, I'm not surprised he didn't make it to an old age. Now, just in case you were curious, like I was telling you before, when everything goes shitty for the pallet company and the FBI is forced to act because they can't just sit on somebody doing the murderings, so it all kind of unfolds at the same time and it's a mess. But several other employees would be charged at that pallet company with arson and then the stealing of the merchandise, blah, 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 including Clint, because he was part of that whole family project. But
wow,
I was a little disappointed because when people talk about this serial killer that made his victims into burgers, I don't believe he did. I don't believe it at all. I think he was trying to make himself big and bad in prison again, just like he did the first go round when he was running his mouth. And 8 years after his trial, I find it very hard to believe that when everything went down, the FBI didn't find Tupperwares of flesh in his freezer. He didn't know they were going to be coming in. So it's just like, no, I don't believe him at all. And then none of these bodies were mission chunks, and anybody else who carves up people to eat, like, it's just like you do with an animal. They're pieced out. They're butchered. Well, and just like with Dahmer and all that, when that came in the news, when they were pulling, like, with Dahmer, with all the, like, the tubs and shit, all those snippets that people were, like, eating that up, they would have done the same thing with this feller if they were like, he was making flesh burgers. No, he was not. He made that shit up. And as much as people want to believe that that's what he was doing, there's no evidence of that. So, hate to be the fun spoiler, but he's just a regular Joe Schmo teeny weeny pecker boy. But I'm glad died in prison.
Well, it seems like it would have been a lot of physical work to dismember a body to turn it into meat. Not saying that people that are obese are lazy. It's just, I feel like it's a lot harder for them to move around and maneuver things that are awkwardly, like a box that's awkwardly shaped and hard to carry. A dead body I would put in the same category, and seeing as how just shoving it under his trailer made him all huffy and puffy. But,
on top of that,
after that chick escaped, it's entirely possible he could have disposed, because he was near water, right? Like he was near a dock or something? No?
No. The loading dock was for trucks.
Oh.
But even if he threw Tupperware into the water, that shit would float. Or at least pop open and people would be like, but no, I don't believe any of it. I don't believe it. He was always on drugs. He lied about his mom, even, like how he was raised. He lied about her even being alive. He lied about being in Vietnam.
Do you know when she died?
Who?
His mom.
Oh, not until well after, like...
Was it after was it before he confessed?
No.
No. Before he confessed to all the extra shenanigans?
No.
She was still alive?
Yes. I want to say she's still... Well, fucking, I don't know. You look it up. I can't remember.
I was just curious, because, like, the one case that I did... the guy was like, I didn't do it. And then as soon as his mom died, he's like, okay, so this is what I really did. And he'd already been in jail for like a decade. So, but he just didn't want his mom to think less of him.
So Joe wanted the death sentence. He didn't want it overturned, but so the reason he was given the death penalty is because you know how when you've done your cases, if somebody is raped and robbed, or it's like somebody dies during a robbery, all those, it escalates what they're being charged with. So because he robbed her of her clothes, which made it important that the body was in one spot and her things were in another, they said he robbed the body, and that's why he was given the death penalty for the murderings. So when the attorneys did their little work and decided that, you know, we don't feel like this actually qualifies. So if you remove that side of it, he wasn't robbing the victims. That wasn't his motivation. His motivation was getting that high from it. Then he's just a murdering piece of trash. So they commuted his sentence to life without parole, which he was upset about because he wanted to be put to death. So that's why I feel like he was motivated to make things more disgusting and gruesome and throw out all these things. He tries to commit suicide 3 times in jail. So I think that's why he's getting more creative with all of his shit. He writes his little memoirs, things that he was trying to be put to death.
Do they do that? If they change the sentence from death to life, would they take it back to death? If there's no proof?
Well, just like they couldn't charge him with all his other confessions of murders because they couldn't prove those either. And I call bullshit because the FBI was all over that place. I find it hard to believe that there was any evidence of him butchering people in there. Again, his size, I don't know if you've ever been in a trailer kitchen, but he's so big as it is to try to move around and butcher a body. I don't believe there's enough elbow room to do all that disassembling and cooking. Not only that, is there were no pedestrians going down there like during the weekday, let alone a weekend. So who's he selling his sandwiches to? And he gets a lot of attention because when he comes with this confession, he does the whole he. So the next time you see a roadside barbecue stand, think about what you could be eating or who. He. Fucking idiot. Again, I'm glad he's dead. I think he's a lying piece of trash. I wish he would have been put to death, but I guess it worked out the way he did. He probably choked on some fries.
I wonder what happened to his son.
Foster care. I hope they changed his name. Really, him being taken away at the age of 6 was the best thing that could have happened to him.
Yeah. Sad, but he's better for it.
I hope he doesn't know who his parents are, and I hope that he is doing great.
We hope you enjoyed today's episode of Homicide Hobbies. If we made you laugh, if we made you cry, or if we mind-fucked you for the day, then we thank you for listening. Please write a review on whatever you're listening to us on. Tell your friends, tell your family, tell your coworkers. We're freaking awesome. And join us next week for another episode of Homicide Hobbies. I'm Andy.
And I'm Claire.
That's all we've got.